the death penalty is another political agenda.
Ohio fails to meet 93% of the guidelines set forth to ensure fairness and accuracy in a capital punishment system.
I guess being innocent is a technicality.
The regular public do not know that it costs more to execute someone.
From a statistical standpoint, that we absolutely have executed innocent people.
Well, since then, it has been determined that that was faulty science.
OTSI seeks to end the use of the death penalty because it fails to achieve any of its legal purposes. So we recognize that it's a flawed system and that we're better served by having alternatives to the death penalty. Well, I think that the capital punishment system as a whole has sort of conveyed this false sense of safety, this false sense that if we exterminate people who are harmful to society, then we'll all be safer. Unfortunately, it's just not the case. States that don't have the death penalty have just as high crime rates as those that do have it. So the fact that the intention was to deter crime, it's really not doing any of that. What we have to recognize is that as long as there's a death penalty system, it's going to be run by humans who sometimes make mistakes. And we see that with exonerations. We see that when we hear about cases where prosecutors withheld 10 pieces of evidence that would have altered the outcome of the trial, and 20 years later we have an exoneration. As long as we're running that kind of a system where people are in charge and people are making the decisions, we're going to make mistakes. So why not put ourselves in a position to not cause some kind of irreversible harm by executing someone who's later proven to be innocent? If we're using a life without parole option, then at some point we can then say, we made a mistake, we got it wrong. Statistically, it's impossible for us to say that we've never executed an innocent person. I mean, you think about the DNA evidence and the technology that's gotten better and that's become useful in a small number of cases. Certainly back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, we didn't have DNA technology in the way that we have it today, and so we can say, I think, from a statistical standpoint, that we absolutely have executed innocent people. Other problems with the system, it seems to cause more harm for victims' family members than it does good. I mean, there are years and years and years of appeals. What that does is that really creates a system that re-victimizes family members over and over and over again. There's a close friend of mine who runs an organization called the Journey of Hope, and it is an organization entirely made up of victims' family members who speak around the country. And what Bill Pelkey says is, when his grandmother was murdered, people would come to him and say, "Oh gosh, I hope that they give that, I hope they give her the death penalty." And he sort of didn't really know how to react to that. Over time, he came to feel that the death penalty wasn't providing any type of service to his family. But what he said, he likened it to, imagine if your loved one became ill and with some form of cancer, terminal illness, and what he's being told, or what we're telling victims, is if you just fill that hole with vengeance and with hate, you'll feel better after your aunt or your grandmother or your father dies of cancer. So vengeance will make you feel better, and hatred will make you feel better. The first thing that Ohio needs to do is it needs to recognize that it has some serious problems with its capital punishment system. So the first thing it needs to do, it needs to halt executions or have a moratorium. And then what we suggest is that the Ohio legislature, both the House of Representatives and the Senate, enact a piece of legislation that's going to provide for a comprehensive study commission of the entire capital punishment system. The American Bar Association released a study in 2007 that showed that Ohio fails to meet 93% of the guidelines set forth to ensure fairness and accuracy in a capital punishment system. The support for the death penalty is a mile wide, but it's an inch deep. So when you get somebody in a position where you're having a conversation and you say, well, why do you think the death penalty is good? And they may say, oh, well, an eye for an eye. This person deserves that. They did this to that person. They should have it done back to them. But then you say, well, what's the other reason? What's the next reason why you think capital punishment is good? I mean, the responses nearly dry up. What we found is that the more information people have about the death penalty and about capital punishment, who gets these sentences, and sort of how they're implemented, how capital punishment is administered, the less comfortable people become with that system. We have to make sure that it's an inclusive dialogue. And when I say inclusive, I mean that murder victims' family members need to have a role. They need to be part of the discussion. Members of the law enforcement community have to be part of the discussion. And certainly members of civic groups and religious leaders have to have a part in the discussion. When we get down to having an honest conversation, that at the end of the day, we're going to realize that a life sentence is 10 times less expensive. It still keeps communities safe. It allows for victims' family members to receive some benefits and some grief counseling, and it makes us safer on the whole.